In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all 3 wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in the sun. The sun baked the land in a cruel orange light, the kind that turned sweat into salt before it even touched the ground. A lone saloon stood at the edge of Dry Creek, its windows clouded with dust and stale smoke. Inside, laughter rang, ugly, drunken laughter that made Sarah flinch. Her husband's laughter. Earl had been losing all night. Cards, whiskey, his temper, everything he touched turned rotten. And when the last coin left his hand, he turned toward her, his eyes glassy, desperate. She knew that look. She'd seen it when he'd sold her wedding ring for liquor, when he'd traded her mother's brooch for a new pair of boots. But this time, it felt different. Darker. "She's strong," Earl slurred, gripping Sarah by the arm and yanking her forward into the lamplight. "Can cook, clean, keep a man company. Worth more than what I owe you, mister." The room fell silent. Men leaned back in their chairs, the cards between their fingers forgotten. The smell of sweat and tobacco mixed thick in the air. Sarah's throat closed as she tried to pull away, but Earl's grip tightened. "You're drunk," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't—" He slapped her. The sound cracked through the saloon, silencing even the piano. She stumbled back, catching herself on the corner of a table, her cheek burning. "I'll take $5 for her," he said, his voice rough and final. "That'll settle my debt." No one spoke. A few men turned away, others chuckled. The dealer looked down, ashamed. But one man at the end of the table didn't move. He sat still, a shadow in a wide-brimmed hat, eyes dark as the bottom of a well. He set down his cards and spoke quietly. $5? Earl sneered. "That's right. You want her or not?" Sarah's heart pounded. She could hear it in her ears, loud and desperate. The stranger rose, slow and deliberate. His boots were worn, his coat faded, but his presence filled the room like a storm about to break. He reached into his vest, pulled out $5, crumpled bills, weathered from use, and placed them on the table. "Untie her," he said. Earl frowned. "You ain't even gonna ask what she's worth?" "I just did," the cowboy said, his voice calm as a river. "And you already answered." A few men laughed under their breath, but Earl didn't. He spat near the man's boots and grabbed the money. "She's yours, cowboy. Don't say I didn't warn you. She's got a mouth on her." Then he was gone, out into the heat and dust, pockets jingling with his $5 and pride he didn't deserve. Sarah stood frozen, her hands shaking. The stranger picked up her bundle, a torn shawl, a few clothes wrapped in cloth, and handed it to her. "You can walk," he said simply. "My horse can carry us both, but I figure you might prefer your own feet for now." She blinked at him. "You bought me," she said, her voice low and bitter. "What do you want from me?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Nothing," he said, "except maybe for you to stop shaking." She didn't believe him. No man ever gave without taking twice as much back. But she followed because there was nothing else to do. The town behind her was full of faces that looked away when she was sold. There was no one left to run to. They rode in silence. The prairie stretched wide and endless, a sea of gold and rust. Sarah's wrists were still raw from the rope Earl had used to drag her along earlier that day. Her feet ached, her mouth dry. The cowboy, Luke, he said his name was, didn't ask questions. He just rode beside her, quiet as a ghost. When the sun dipped low and the shadows grew long, he pointed ahead. "That ridge," he said. "My ranch is just beyond it. You'll have a place to sleep? Food to eat?" She frowned, suspicious. "And what do you expect in return?" He looked at her for a long time, the wind tugging at the corner of his hat. "You've been traded enough for one lifetime," he said softly. "I'm not adding to it." She turned away, the sting of tears surprising her. No one had spoken to her like that in years, without demand, without cruelty. When they reached the ranch, it was smaller than she imagined, but sturdy. A weathered barn, a corral, and a cabin with light flickering from the window. A dog barked once, then wagged its tail at Luke's voice. He led her to the porch and pushed open the door to a small room with a narrow bed and a folded blanket. "You can stay here," he said. "There's stew on the stove. Eat what you want." She looked around. It was simple but clean. The scent of cedar and smoke filled the room. On the table sat a single photograph, a woman and a child, both smiling. "Your wife?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. He nodded. "Was. She and the boy died in the fever." His eyes darkened, but he said no more. Sarah lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry," he shrugged, stepping back. "You should rest. Tomorrow you can help around the ranch if you're able. No one will touch you here." The words hit her harder than any slap ever had. No one will touch you here. When the door closed, she sank onto the bed, pressing her hands against her face. The tears came quietly at first, then heavier until her shoulders shook. For years she'd begged for mercy, for safety, for someone, anyone, to stop the hurt. Now that she had it, she didn't know what to do with it. That night, she barely slept. The moonlight crept through the window, painting the floor silver. She could hear the faint sounds of the ranch, the creak of wood, the sigh of the wind through the grass. For the first time, no one yelled at her. No boot stomped toward her bed. No fists. No fear. At dawn, she woke early and went outside. The morning was cool, the air sweet. Luke was already there, mending a fence. He glanced up when he saw her. "You don't have to work," he said. "I want to," she replied quietly. "I don't want to just take." He nodded once, saying nothing more, but his lips twitched, the hint of a smile that wasn't quite there yet. All day they worked side by side, speaking only when needed. She fed the chickens, scrubbed the pans, gathered eggs. He fixed the corral and led the horses to water. The rhythm of it, the simplicity, steadied her heart. When evening came, she found herself humming an old song she hadn't sung in years. Luke looked up from the porch and said, "That's a good sound." She froze, embarrassed. "Sorry, habit." "Don't be sorry," he said. "You ought to sing more." Something in his tone made her throat tighten. She turned away quickly, afraid he'd see the tears she couldn't explain. That night, as she lay in bed, she whispered into the dark, "Why'd you buy me?" From the porch, his voice came soft through the open window. "Because no one else was going to save you." Her breath caught. For the first time, the word save didn't sound like pity. It sounded like freedom. The snow came early that winter, blanketing the prairie in a quiet white that softened even the hardest corners of the world. Sarah stood on the porch of the ranch house, her breath curling into the cold air. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching Luke lead the horses in from the fields. His coat was dusted with snow, his hat pulled low. He looked older somehow, but steadier too, a man who had made peace with silence. Sarah still remembered the day she arrived here, broken and frightened, sold like cattle for $5. The memory haunted her sometimes, slipping into her dreams like a chill through the window. But life at the ranch had begun to change her. Every sunrise, every small act of kindness, every quiet meal shared by the fire, they rebuilt pieces of her she thought were gone forever. She learned the rhythm of the land, how to read the clouds, how to mend a torn fence, how to tell when a calf was sick just by its cry. She learned Luke's ways, too. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, it mattered. And though he rarely smiled, his gentleness spoke louder than any laughter. The townsfolk still talked. Whenever she went to the market in Dry Creek, whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the one who was sold. $5. Can you believe it? Sometimes women pulled their children closer. Some men stared too long." One morning, as she traded butter for flour at the general store, she heard someone mutter, "If I'd known you could buy a wife that cheap, I'd have done it years ago." The words hit like a slap. She turned sharply, her face pale, her hands trembling. But before she could speak, Luke's voice cut through the room. Calm, low, but with an edge that silenced everyone. Careful, he said, stepping between her and the man. You talk about my wife that way again, and you'll be paying for your words with teeth. No one moved. The man looked away, muttered an apology, and backed off. Sarah said nothing on the ride home, her throat too tight. But when they reached the gate, Luke stopped the wagon. Don't let them shame you, he said quietly. They're small people with smaller hearts. She nodded, eyes wet. It's not them I hate, she whispered. It's the reminder. Every time someone says that word, wife, I remember I wasn't given that choice. Luke turned to her, his breath visible in the cold air. You have the choice now. The words stayed with her for days. That night, as the fire crackled and snow drifted against the windows, she sat beside Luke in the small living room. The flames painted his face in amber light. He was fixing a broken bridle, his rough hands moving carefully over the leather. Luke, she said softly, do you ever think about leaving this place? He looked up thoughtful. Sometimes. But the land's all I've got. It's quiet here. I like quiet, she nodded. Quiet's nice, she murmured. When it doesn't feel lonely. He set the bridle aside, leaning back in his chair. You still feel alone? Sometimes, she admitted. But not like before. Before, I was alone even when I wasn't. He studied her for a moment, his gaze steady, patient. You've changed, Sarah, he said. When you came here, you looked like you'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. Now you hum when you feed the chickens. She smiled faintly, embarrassed. You notice that? He nodded. I notice a lot of things, like how you still don't eat until everyone else has. She blinked, surprised. Habit, she said softly. Old habit, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Let it go. You don't serve anyone here. Something inside her broke then, quietly, like a frozen branch cracking under snow. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone. For years, she had survived by being invisible, by making herself small and silent, and now someone was asking her to be seen. The next morning, she rose early and baked bread. She hummed as she worked, the kitchen warm and fragrant. Luke came in, rubbing his hands by the stove. Smells good, he said. She grinned. Then you can set the table. Seems fair. He raised an eyebrow, but did as told. And for the first time, laughter filled that house. Soft, hesitant, but real. Winter passed slowly, but it carried peace with it. When spring came, the fields bloomed wild with color, and life on the ranch moved with quiet joy. Yet, something deeper had begun to shift between them, something neither dared name. One afternoon, Sarah was tending the garden when Luke returned from town. He carried supplies, nails, a new rope, and a small box wrapped in cloth. What's that? She asked, wiping her hands. He set it on the table and nodded for her to open it. Inside was a simple silver ring, polished but modest. Her breath caught. I thought... He cleared his throat, suddenly uncertain. I thought maybe you'd want to wear it, if you wanted my name. She stared at him, unable to speak. Your name? Marston, he said quietly. You don't owe me an answer now. You don't owe me anything, but I'd like to give you back your choice. She felt the air leave her lungs. Her whole life had been taken, sold, decided for her. And now, standing in a small wooden kitchen with flour on her hands, someone was offering her freedom. Not to leave, but to belong. Slowly, she picked up the ring. You mean this? She asked softly. Not as payment, not as pity? He shook his head. As love, tears welled in her eyes. She laughed through them, trembling. $5, she whispered. That's what I cost you. He smiled. A real, warm smile that softened all the sharp lines of his face. Worth every penny, he said. She pressed the ring into his hand. Then put it on me before I change my mind. The wedding was small, just them and a preacher who came riding from the next town. There were no flowers, no dress, no guests, just the sound of wind through the grass and the soft rhythm of two hearts finding peace. When Luke said, I do, Sarah's voice caught before she whispered the same. Afterward, they stood alone under the open sky. The land stretched around them, golden and endless. She slipped her hand into his, feeling the warmth of it, the certainty. I used to think I was nothing, she said quietly. That being sold meant I stopped being human. But you, she looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. You taught me I can be more than what I was. He squeezed her hand. You always were, he said. You just needed someone to remind you. Years later, people still spoke of Sarah Marston, the woman who'd been sold for $5 but became the soul of the Marston Ranch. She raised children there, tended the land, helped others who'd been hurt the way she once had. When a scared girl came to her door, running from cruelty, Sarah took her in, fed her, clothed her, and said softly, I was once where you are, but you're not broken. You're just waiting to start again. And when the girl asked how she knew, Sarah smiled faintly and touched the silver ring on her finger. Because love bought me back, she whispered.